Word up, Brainiacs. Real quick heads up. Our charity that is being highlighted this month, the month of March, is Bake Their Day. Go to baketheirday.org to learn more about this wonderful organization. They're located in Guam, and what they do is it's a bakery where they focus on creating and providing birthday cakes for youth that are either in custody, treatment centers, residential centers, detention centers, just all those different places. These are young people in a situation in their life that's very, very tricky and difficult, and don't always get some of the little niceties that they would get if they were in a home where that were happening. So go to baketheirday.org. Become a Patreon donor this month. Go and make direct donations, and definitely share them on social media. 3 different ways to help out Bake Their Day. Now on with the show.
The Broken Brain.
Recording in progress.
All right, so we are going to dive right into part 2. And who knows, I may, we'll put it in part 1 and part 2. I'll close them up close together, though, so they'll be here. Michael, hi.
Hello, everybody. How you doing, Dwight? And hello, listeners, again for our part 2. Thanks for coming back to hear what we have to say now.
It's something we've had a little time in between the recording, and I've been really excited to pick up. I think that we had ended before. We were just talking about this, that we ended at the point where you had already you testified at the trial, and right at the same time starting into your own training, your own degree in psychology, and then moving into working with, not just working with abuse, but working on the offender's end of the spectrum, right?
That's right. Yeah. The agency that I was a case manager for had a number of different programs, and during my graduate studies, I did internships working with different populations, and one of their populations was sex offenders. And I thought, well, this could be interesting. And it would just be it would just be an internship, and then I'd be done with it after 10 weeks. And but it was toward the end of my studies, and they really liked my work that I was doing, and they hired me into their program full time after I graduated. So I found myself, in the the jaws of the monsters. I don't know.
One of the things I always say, my favorite thing about podcasting, and it's true, is meeting really cool people. And one of the things that I'm learning to appreciate about you so much is you have, there's the old phrase, lust for life, or a passion, but you have a real, I want to take it a step deeper. You have a real engagement of life. Just the fact, the way you said, and I could totally, just from meeting you so far, see you being like, well, this will be interesting. It's like, I feel like you have this engagement. You're interested in life. And I admire that a lot. I don't know if you agree with my description, but
yeah, thank you. I'm open to most things, and I do try to, see the teachable moments in everything, and learn my lessons, and, admit my mistakes when I make them, which is frequently. And just carry on, and, forgive myself and move on, and, just try to be comfortable in my own skin. But yeah, you had to, I had definitely had an open mind, and I do admit that I did find it fascinating. I had learned a lot during my teacher's trial, and especially at his sentencing, the sentencing guideline, the sentencing report, and different specialists that the prosecution brought in from Guantanamo, who specialize working with sex offenders. And so I learned a lot during that process. And so, there was some fascination, but also revulsion, and it was challenging. And I didn't like
about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't like it. And I didn't like my clients for the most part, because at that point, by the time I had them as adults, most were very narcissistic, no victim empathy, manipulators, cons. And as we talked about last time, in DNA therapy, it's pretty confrontive. Drug and alcohol therapy can be pretty confrontive. And this is even more so. My supervisor, a psychologist who also worked extensively with sex offenders, I learned a lot from him. And, and I learned how to go to the line, insofar as, confronting. But I learned a lot in the process. I learned a lot during the assessments. I assessed about 100 offenders during my time there. And I saw patterns, and For the most part, 80 or 90% of the offenders I worked with, at some point they would disclose during the assessment that an older female caregiver, babysitter, aunt, mother, whatever, grandmother had offended them. I got to the point where I was just, in my mind, I'm like, okay, when, it's going to come up soon.
When is this going to
because
come out? Right.
it generally did. So
You get a vibe like that sometimes. I've noticed that too, where there are certain times where I'm like, oh, I can think I know where we're going. And I'm not always right, but oftentimes you're like, okay, this seems to be the way people talk when they're about to reveal something. And this is an area of therapy that is typically more like, I want to say there is an appropriate level of confrontation, but oftentimes that confrontation in many instances of therapy is very collaborative. Hey, you're doing that to yourself, right? Okay, we've got this rapport we can do. I feel like in especially hardened sex offender treatment, oftentimes that confrontation has to be more direct, more blunt. I don't know if this matches your experience, but it's kind of like, no, you can't.
Absolutely.
If I allow you as my client to get away with that, you're going to hurt other people as well as, continue to be unhealthy.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Can be so it's tiring anyway, even if you're not revulsed and having your own, reaction internally from your experience.
My partner would say when I'd get home after a busy day and he'd look at my face and he's like, oh my gosh, you look completely destroyed. And I feel destroyed. I feel wiped out. I feel drained. And I also feel like in a way, kind of hitting my head against the wall, working with people who, you just know that there's just so much BS coming and how to wade through that. And, for the few cases, the few offenders who really wanted help, who wanted to contain their behavior, then to be able to work with them and maybe have a successful outcome, or at least the potential for a successful outcome.
Absolutely. That's something I was very curious about. With your experience, did you find that, was it hard to kind of when you suss that out, or when somebody is actually, when you were able to catch on, like, this person does want to change, this person, they're not just here because they're supposed to be by the court or whatever. Was that difficult given the internal, I don't know if I want to say triggering, if that's a good word, right? Of being like, I'm working with someone who has hurt people the way I was hurt, right? Did it make it harder, or did it help give you insight into, like, when somebody really was trying, how did that affect you? How was it working with them?
Well, it was frustrating because, as I said before, it felt like I was hitting my head against the wall with intractable issues with most of these men and a few women. And on one hand, yes, there's glimmers of hope, and there's some individuals who are seeming to get it, who may have been on the cyclical end of abuse themselves and have that insight and know where the origins of their abuse came from and how they were acting out. And those were the ones that I think we had the most opportunity, the ones who are able to, who remembered and identified having been offended, and then continued the cyclical process of offending others in an effort to take back their power, falsely, and try to be the one in the powerful position.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Very, very taxing. So ultimately you didn't feel like this was the specialty that you wanted to focus on, or how did that evolve for you?
Well, I mean, there aren't many of us in the United States that do that work. Yeah. At least I learned at the time. I did go to a conference once, and we lamented, the 300 of us that, nobody wants to do this. Nobody likes the clients. And, people shake their heads going, why are you wasting your time? So, it is a very specialized field. I eventually left, not because I was unhappy, but because I just had the opportunity to go on to the next adventure. So I left on great terms, and I'm so happy to have had the experience. I do, there were some cases where, yes, of course, I can extend some compassion. Of course, every situation is different. Every case is different. And so, part of, I think, my growth is to, look at the big picture kind of like, going into the trial of my teacher, I knew that defense attorneys do bad shit. They do bad stuff, but so do prosecutors, and for the system to work, everyone needs to do their job. And so, defense attorneys aren't bad people. They're just doing their job. They do what they do. So yeah, it was, it helped me with compassion, but it also helped me to wade through the bullshit. And yeah, I am grateful that I was able to do that work, and I hope that in some cases I did, make a difference, and help some of these folks on their way. But I don't think the outlook is not optimistic yet.
Right. Sure.
Say again?
No. I mean, it is very important and good work to be done, because it is something that people would rather pretend it doesn't exist. People would rather look at that and just say, well, get the pitchforks and the torches and kind of this and that. But for society to function, it's like, well, once people are over here, if they're incarcerated or if they're being watched or if they're whatever, they're in the system, we got to do something. What are we going to do? Not try to address the problem? And that's not helpful. And it is a very interesting thing. It reminds me of I had a professor in graduate school who he talked about years and years that he ran domestic violence recovery groups, but they were for offenders. They were for people who had abused their spouses and been charged with it. And many of them had horrendous attitudes coming in and all throughout about this is just the way, and mostly men. I think he worked exclusively with men, but who had just misogynistic, just like violent, just kind of like people he would never want to associate with in his private life. But I remember he told me that he found one technique that he had to work with them somehow, and he had to want them to get better enough to be their therapist. And so he had this trick where he said if he could find one thing in their story that he could have empathy for, it allowed him, he didn't make him like them, all of them or whatever, but it allowed him to work in a way that he felt good. I have that compassionate enough to be able to be, I know that I'm helping as much as I can because I know what it's like to not be listened to and not like that. Now, I definitely didn't do the things they did in reaction to it. But anyway, just finding that way to work with something that is personally triggering or just in general is hard to work with. It allows someone to be working with them. I mean, that's important, or else nobody would probably. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And everybody deserves support when it's appropriate. And, at times in our careers, we're in positions where we can extend that, even though it's uncomfortable for us as practitioners.
Absolutely. Overall, did you find that to be, obviously, it sounds like you found it to be fulfilling as far as professionally, you were doing good work and all that. On a personal level, how did it affect you? Did you find it empowering at all to work with this, or?
I did. I felt like I was facing some fears, facing some monsters in that process. There's no disclosure. I would never disclose anything about my past to these groups. So they did not know. I was just a blank slate doing my job. But yeah, it did. I think it did help me to grow and to have more understanding and compassion. But it also, when it comes to the work that I did, me leaving, community mental health, it was for the next opportunity. But my impressions of community mental health were not positive. I saw a lot of dysfunction.
Sure.
Paperwork is currency.
Oh, man. Yes,
and how can
you're echoing? I'm having flashbacks to the same feeling.
And listeners who are in mental health, what I'm talking about, what we're talking about. So, paperwork is currency, and that part of it, I really just disliked and was disillusioned and frustrated. So it was a relief to move away from the field, although I find psychology fascinating. And I loved studying it, and I loved doing the work that I did. In many ways, I felt so triggered, and not just with the offenders, but overall. And I'm like, wow, I was raised in a chaotic family with so many psychological issues. And why am I putting myself in these positions today professionally? Because yes, I did feel deeply triggered by the whole thing.
Mhm.
So it was a relief to move on. I'm glad I did the work. I'm proud of the work I did. I'm proud of the masters that I got. But I'm glad that I'm not in that field anymore, insofar as community mental health. I
Yeah.
still am in the field here in Da Nang, Vietnam, and we can talk about that.
Yeah.
But not
Yeah.
not community mental health.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's a good thing. It's one of those things. It's so necessary. It's an important thing. I think it could be done differently. I think that everyone in our field probably should do I'm going to say a tour of service, but frankly, whether or not I believe that is what a lot of people do, because a lot of internships are there. A lot of people go there. And once
Yeah.
again, being quite frank, a lot of people go through it and move out of it simply either because there's that ratio of kind of like the burnout feeling of being in such a kind of just a meat grinder of managed healthcare and government involvement. It's tiring, it's wearing out. The other side of that, though, is there are lots of people I know who would stay, but they move into either a private practice or they move into a different role or position because they can't afford to work there. I mean, that's another part of it. You see the same thing in education, where there's a lot of people who leave teaching, don't have a full all the way to retirement career because they can't afford to live in that. And it is hard to leave for some people as well. So it's a mixed bag of, those are inherent endemic problems to those systems as well. That, boy, it would be nice to see it. And you do see different areas, of course, probably deal with it differently. But anyway, that's a whole nother thing. We should do a whole episode about community mental health and the ups and downs and how you try to make it work. But what was your next adventure there?
Well,
When you went from there?
sure. I got the unfortunate news that my grandmother in Queens, New York, was ill. She passed away, and she did leave me some money. And at the time, my partner at the time in Columbus, Ohio, Tom, he was in the food business. His family had a pizza company, and we wanted to do a business together. We both were entrepreneurs. We both had lots of experience in the past. I had run one of Frank's bars in Washington, D.C. many years earlier. So, I knew how to run a business and I knew the operations side. But we also knew what we didn't know, aspects of the restaurant business, which is what we decided on doing. So we Tom and I looked at the restaurant landscape in Columbus, and we also looked at the gay businesses and gay bars and gay restaurants. And there was one gay restaurant and a few gay bars and a few nightclubs, but everything was hidden behind closed doors, no windows, nothing open to the world. And we wanted to change that. We wanted to have a restaurant that had big windows, that was out and open. And our restaurant, the building that we chose, was on Main Street, and the name of our restaurant was Out on Main because we were out on Main. Yeah,
This is
we
great.
were out.
I love that.
Yeah.
Boy, talk about what a missed opportunity if you hadn't have thought of that name. But yeah, that just like planets line up to make that. That's a great name and a great situation.
Thank you. So we had a conversation one afternoon, and I said to Tom, I says, well, I wonder what would happen if Willa Cather, Alexander the Great, Tennessee Williams, and these other icons, LGBT icons through the years, what if they all came together on the main stage around a round table? What would they say to each other? What stories would they share? What lessons would they share that they learned, and so on? And that was the beginning of Out on Main. And coming up, and that's how we came up with the concept, celebrating LGBTQ history and culture. And at that time, theme restaurants were very popular. And Planet Hollywood, Hard Rock Cafe, Rainforest Cafe. And we were in this little city, Columbus, Ohio, in the Midwest. And, in the end of the day, it really worked out that we did it in this small little city because it may have been found to be trite or cliche in a larger city. Although we did a beautiful design and, we won awards for the design. We had an Elton John costume, a Liberace costume from Las Vegas, Melissa Etheridge guitar, Greg Louganis Speedos. We had great memorabilia and everything. And, we had big murals with images throughout the years. We had a famous 50 mural. All those people I was mentioning, what would they say if they came together?
Huh.
And we came up with this, idea to have a restaurant that would be a safe place for LGBTQ people to meet and to be able to share with each other, and so on. And we did, and we opened to international attention. We were on CNN, and over the years, we had our evenings became happenings, where things would happen, whether it was an author who is sitting at one table and someone sitting at the next table realizes that it's a famous author and screams, "That's my famous author, my famous author." And that was Alan Gurganus at that
Oh, wow.
time.
Okay.
And yeah, and so yeah, and we became a place where LGBTQs as well as our allies. We called our allies at the time hip heteros.
Oh,
Hip heteros,
I like
yes.
that.
Yeah, hip heteros. And,
Makes me want to be
we
hip.
had, and you are. Uh, and yeah, and we just got, the local reviewer, the Grumpy Gourmet, he was in our corner. And we just did a lot of creative stuff insofar as marketing. We had entertainment. We had lots of celebrities, including Grace Jones, and Eartha Kitt, and Betty DeGeneres, Ellen's mom, who at that time was an advocate and would travel all over the country doing activism. And she would be in Ohio once or twice a year. She'd always come to the restaurant and she'd say, "Someday I'm going to bring Ellen. Someday I'm going to bring Ellen." And she did on her 70th birthday.
Oh,
Ellen said,
okay.
"Where do you want to go for your birthday, Mom?" Ellen was in town for her comeback comeback concert at the Palace Theater, and Mom said, "Oh yeah, I've got a great place for us to go." And and it was great. Her whole posse, 20 of them, showed up, and
Wow.
it was really the first time in the history of the restaurant I kind of was a bodyguard to keep the groupies and the
Yeah.
fans away, so that Ellen and her mom and Anne Heche was there, and the whole production crew could have their dinner. But they couldn't have been more gracious and kind
Hmm.
after dinner, posing for pictures. And I toured Ellen around the restaurant, and she said, "Michael, I envisioned something like this myself in LA. When I came out, I thought maybe I'll do a cafe or something along these lines." And so look, for a schmo from Long Island like me to be able to have an experience like that, with these such interesting people, was remarkable. And when we look at the chaos of my childhood on Long Island, I would call the PTL club. I would beg to speak to Tammy Faye Baker's. I mean, I was like, I just love her. I love Tammy Faye Baker. I want to speak to Tammy Faye Baker. I was on Valium and I was crying just like she was crying, drinking, teenage drinker and all of that. And here we are 30 years later, there she is in my restaurant. Because she was a guest at one of the big circuit parties, and she came to the restaurant with her entourage. And and I got to tell her, "My God, Tammy, I used to watch you as a kid, and you were a safe haven for me. I felt like when I was watching you, life was good and I was safe, and everything." And so to have these types of remarkable
Yeah.
experiences was really something else.
That
So
must have,
the restaurant.
yeah, have the internal feelings as you're going through that. Because I'm sure it was probably, I mean, it couldn't have been without struggle. I mean, I don't know what the year exactly this was, but I remember I was old enough to know the way people openly talked when Ellen came out, for example. I hear people try to dress that up now and say, well, was it really that bad? Her show certainly ended right when she came out. Let me put it that way. And I remember how people talked when I as I was growing up, how openly people talked in ways that, well, I don't say it anymore, but unfortunately, we still hear it. But so I was curious, it sounds like you overcame with just a sense of positivity and triumph and beauty that you brought to this. But did you find, was there a struggle too? Was there a fight that had to happen?
Well, we had our challenges. I mean, getting open, the construction, surprises in construction. We planned to spend more money than we budgeted, and we did plus.
Mhm.
And so yes, it was a very challenging. And I felt like frequently I was over my head. We did bring in talent to support us operationally. We had a great chef who was with us throughout the entire run, and was an important part of our family. And in many ways, because we talked at length in the last episode and now this part two, is that the whole thing with my teacher and the publicity that came out as a result of that. And there was an article that was done in a national magazine called Vanity Fair. And, and they really tried to create a mystery that didn't exist. And, and it was really a sympathetic portrayal of a pedophile child molester, if you can imagine. If you can imagine, and I'm really trying not to use the F word here. If you can imagine that they did that, and they tried to portray that this teacher was being manipulated and victimized by this dastardly hustler, Michael Caven. And look, they're supposed to sensationalize, and I don't care about anything as long as it's the truth. But they, created mysteries that don't exist and all of this stuff. So I felt that publicity was so bad because in the end they connected pedophilia and homosexuality. It was really disgusting, a disgusting piece of journalism.
And a thing that, and I'm even old enough to know that when I started working in mental health, that there was still hanging around this, I didn't have any supervisors who out and out believed that homosexuality and pedophilia were the same, but they would talk a lot about the associations and as if it was like, here's how someone turns gay, or here's why, that was still hanging on. Thankfully, I don't see it as much with professionals, obviously, in the field, but I certainly heard people equate that a lot over my life. And, it's just something that is insidious and very, very gross, obviously, to say the least.
It is. And right. And it was a disturbing article, and but it reflected where that magazine was coming from at the time. It was disappointing because previous articles that they had done on teacher student abuse were actually quite enlightened, but in this case they took a detour, and they had prime heat with me because of my background and my sensational 20s. And all of that. So I do understand. And I think that, at the time, though, I felt that the publicity was so negative. I felt that it damaged the gay movement in a negative way. So in many ways, the restaurant was my redemption. It was my personal redemption that despite the messiness and complicatedness of my teacher's trial, and despite, my life in my 20s, as the pampered toy poodle in the penthouse of the big gay bar owner, I still, I'm bringing, I bring a total story. And I kind of lost my way there. So I'm going to need you to help bring me back to where I was going with all of this.
Well,
because I kind of went on some riffs.
Not at all. I think, and that was why I was curious about the struggle part of it as well. And I think it goes back to the way, as you used the term adventure a lot in your life, I think you embrace those things, and you had such a tremendous triumph in spite of the ways and the attitudes people have. And I can only imagine that must have gone. I know that particularly in the 80s is where I'm thinking of, as most of my childhood was spent, having exposure to anyone who was a member of the gay community, right? My neighbors they weren't married because it wasn't legal back then, but, I had two men who were my neighbors were a gay couple, and knowing them helped to shape. So that growing up, things that I heard from other sources were like, well, that's not how my friends are. The friends who live next door, who we love and appreciate and are great people. So that's some bullshit. Huh. Okay. Now I was able to do that because I knew people. So I think that's the powerful psychological and social kind of advocacy, is this relationship building. And you were doing that with the whole community. It's quite a bit of success.
Yes. And thank you. And there was the redemption part, but there was also the part with the restaurant where it became much bigger than me and Tom, our co-founder and my then life partner. It became much bigger than us. And we were just facilitators for a much bigger story. And, we can talk about Ellen and Eartha and Grace Jones and all these celebrities over the years, but the most important patrons that we had were really our solo acts. We had lots of solo acts. They weren't partnered up; they were on their own, and they became part of our extended family. And they were in the restaurant 3, 4, 5 times a week. So we treasured everyone, whether it was the celebrity or the solo act, folks who would come on special occasions or our regular patrons. We were very fortunate to have such a loyal backing and following. I just needed more numbers. I needed more numbers. We struggled financially in the early years, and then it kind of evened out in the last few years. And then 9/11 happened, and people stopped going out. And even though we're in Columbus and we're not in New York or Washington, still, people just stopped going out. We were an independent restaurant. We didn't have deep pockets insofar as having multiple units where you could, move stuff around. And so it just got me and Tom thinking about, okay, it's been 6 years. We've exceeded all of our expectations for this restaurant. Times are changing, and maybe we want to look at some other things and bring the curtain down of this adventure on our own terms. And that's what we decided to do. We did a 2-month notice so everyone could come in for their final meals.
Wow.
And we brought it down on our terms. We gave our employees a full month severance for staying to the end and stuff like that. So we were able to go out on our own terms in our own way and bring this story, adventure, fantasy, gay fantasia, to a close. And now, years later, we have the memories, we have the videos, and of course, time softens the hard edges. It was not easy. It was very, very challenging, and I was stressed most of the time. And I was, struggling at the time with, bipolar issues, on and off, alcohol and drugs. Because my journey with sobriety has been one of relapse, constant, frequent over the years. Many, many examples of a year, 2 years, 3 years of sobriety, many, many month chips, but lots of relapse. So, those years with the restaurant, although I was okay and together, I did have my moments. And it was, I was lucky that in the last year, I was able to enjoy it a little bit more and sit back and, let all of my employees who had developed so well, run the show, and I could enjoy it, as an observer and having fun. So it was a great, it was an exciting, unexpected adventure where we went places we never imagined that we could go, but we also knew when it was time to take our final bow and move on.
Mm-hmm. That's a wonderful thing to be able to do. Wow. I mean, on your own terms like that, that's great. What did you, well, and maybe there's things in the middle here, but what did you end up in Vietnam? What brought you out there? I know I've read a lot.
Well, sure.
And talked to people who are, what is it, expat? Is that what it's called when you immigrate somewhere?
Yeah, we call ourselves expats. We're really not. I mean, an expat is someone who's totally left their country.
Oh, okay.
And so it's more casual, the term expat now. Well, after the restaurant, Tom and I moved to Philadelphia, and he was expanding the family business out there. And unfortunately, we didn't make it, and we wound up parting ways as friends. And I would stay in Philly and work in real estate for about 10 years, do some small time development. And then in 2015, I was like, wow, this is really, I'm not having a good time here. I had lots of overhead and unhappy relationship. I was tired of my clients, and I just wanted to, just move on. And I did what's known in recovery world as a geographic cure. But I knew exactly what I was doing. It was time to move on. And so I sold my house, gave away my professional clothes, sold my car, and downsized to a suitcase. And I couldn't afford to retire in the States, but I could certainly afford to semi-retire in Southeast Asia. So I started in Australia, spent a month there, then look at the map. Okay, Indonesia. Then I looked at the map. Okay, Vietnam. I'll spend a few months there, see what's happening. And I really didn't know how the countries, the U.S. and the Vietnam, had normalized the relations. I didn't know any of that. I didn't even know if I'd be welcome. honestly, as an American. But I wanted to check it out. Many years earlier, I had seen brochures of the natural beauty of Vietnam, which is really amazing. So it always stayed in my mind, someday I'd like to, visit Vietnam. So, 3 months became 6 months, became 9 months, became a year, and I traveled all over the country. I, used Airbnb. I lived with many families, many different types of families in many different areas. And I fell in love with the country and the culture and the people. And then I arrived in Da Nang about 4 or 5 months later, and I'm like, wow, this has everything I'm looking for: beaches and mountains, exactly what I envisioned when I left the States. I just didn't know where it was. So I would leave Vietnam and go to Cambodia, Laos, India, and South America. But Da Nang had made an impression on me, and in 2017, I returned and decided to build a life here. And like many expats, I started teaching. And because of my business background, I was identified by a recruitment agency to teach business English, business communication, presentation skills, and eventually I was hired by a local university, and that's really my specialty is business communication. So I'm a lecturer at a local university here, and I've been doing this. Next year will be my 8th year. But it's been really interesting, and this we keep using the word adventure. This adventure in Vietnam has had a number of unexpected experiences. One of them was that for 6 months, after I started teaching, I did a 6-month gig teaching theater at a local private school, local international private school, which again was totally unexpected. And yes, that is my undergraduate degree, but I'd never taught a class in my life. I learned. That was unexpected. I did consulting for a local restaurant group and wound up being a keynote speaker for them at their grand opening for their flagship store here in Da Nang. That was, speaking in front of 700 people with pictures of my restaurant on the big screen, telling them all about it. Who would imagine that they'd even be interested?
You go back and whisper in the ear of your younger self on opening day, you'd be like, "What? No, come on. We're just hoping to stay open, right?"
Right. I mean, I sent Tom a picture and I said, "Tom, I'm talking about our restaurant here to these 700 upscale, Vietnamese hotshots." Yeah. I said, "How does this happen?" So did that, and go ahead.
I was curious as you keep going, but I was just curious how your life experiences just seem to build on each other so well. Speaking from the psychological psychotherapist side of things, I think sometimes it's such a specialized field. People think of it as, this is what I do. This little box over here, I do this corner of the world and this therapy thing, but then taking that as well as all your other experiences and moving into and through other industries, but yet they seem to all seem to have some similarities, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
That's right. That's right. And yes, you talk about one thing leading to another. And here in Vietnam, all of my work has been through referrals and recommendations. One has always led to the other. They're very good about that. If they like you, they'll reward you and recommend you. And I found uni to be very loyal to me. We can talk later about. I'm curious how far that loyalty will extend now that I'm public with all of my background, which I wasn't before, and when they hired me, but we can talk about that later.
Okay.
So anyway, but here I am, about a year and a half ago, I saw that a local mental health clinic was reopening after COVID. And it was founded by a colleague of mine from the private school. And I'm like, this sounds interesting. I wouldn't mind perhaps getting back into the field again. So long story short, I'm practicing psychotherapy. I work with clients mostly on Saturday mornings at a mental health clinic here in Da Nang. I also work with families, and I work with couples. I'm the only English-speaking couples counselor therapist in Da Nang.
Okay.
And in Vietnam, there's no licensure, so it's all by credential. So I'm a master's level. So if we were to look at it in the States, I'd be a clinical counselor. I think a licensed clinical counselor is what my
same as
licensure would be.
And yeah, that's me too. So
yeah. So in any case, so I'm able to practice, and it's been great. It's been a new addition, a new addition to my life that gets me back to psychology, which I said earlier I find fascinating. And also, the mental health clinic has launched a suicide prevention hotline. And I helped with that. 30 years ago, when I was getting my master's, I did volunteer work, of course, at the Suicide Prevention Hotline, and went through their great training in Franklin County, Ohio, and worked the line for a year. And it was a great experience. You want to talk about learning how to listen? Listen to somebody who's about to take their life.
Right.
You got to listen pretty carefully. You got to listen really carefully. So I was, I kind of went back in time, about all the trainings that I went through 30 years ago, and put together a training program. And so this mental health clinic, which has offices in Saigon and Hanoi, it's gotten going. So I was able to take something from 30 years ago and bring my experience and help, this firm to launch its suicide prevention hotline. So again, totally unexpected experiences, Dwight and listeners, that I did not expect any of this when I left the States in 2015.
Yeah. Huh. It's well, and just going into that thought of things, once again, building on each other and then finding and taking the opportunities when they come up. There's an old thought process. People sometimes call it just the practice of saying yes, right? Jim Carrey made a ridiculous movie about it, but the idea of saying, like, when something comes up, do I say, nah, maybe not, or I'm not sure, or do I go, yeah, all right? And it sounds like you're very much a yes. Yep. Sure. Let's try it. Kind of a person. That's pretty cool.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Suit up and show up and do what's next. I love the Vietnamese, but I also know what they expect. And for the most part, the answer is always yes for whatever I'm asked to do, especially at university, but it's all reasonable and they take care of me and they've given me a good deal. But yes, it has helped me a lot, especially when you're living in a foreign country and you're creating opportunities. You have to be open, and I have been open to all possibilities. And it's served me well. And again, gratitude is the foundation of my life. And for you listeners out there who've been listening to us in these two sessions, resilience, never giving up, carrying on. It's just, look at my story, and hopefully wherever you're at in your life, it can help you to carry on.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, one of the things I like is it's not just a great story, it's an ongoing story. As any story that has more to it than you're just hearing, and you're still, it's so easy for us to get into a groove at any point in our life, no matter what age, and say, this is it. We're just kind of riding things out. And, very much we stay healthier and enjoy things and our quality of life, which is a risk, by the way, that people don't talk about enough, which is the risk of our quality of life. Life isn't just about avoiding death, right? It suffers when we're not engaged and interested in what's around us. And so that's a great example, I think, that you show. I find just in these conversations, I felt very much like last time we talked, I felt energized after, like, all right, let's go, kind of a feeling.
Good.
It's very contagious that you bring with you. I'm grateful for you sharing it with everybody, and especially with the vulnerability that you've been willing to have, not just here, but just with the world. You just published, had an op-ed piece that's being published online. If you want to maybe mention, where do people find that?
Sure. I just got word from an editor with the New Hampshire Union Leader that they are publishing an op-ed piece that I've written. As your listeners know, and we've talked about, I'm a budding memoirist. My memoir has not yet been published. It is in development. And these days, if you are an author, this is what you do. You go on podcasts and you get your story out there, have your website, and do your social media. And I was not happy about that. Not happy. I would much rather publish the book and do publicity.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it meant kind of coming out again. And, prior to, coming out on social media with my public Facebook page, Michael Caven, writer, yes, I was pretty compartmentalized, and you really needed to know where to look to find that teacher stuff. And although I think that uni knew, certainly when they hired me in 2018, of course they had to have known because they researched, they green lighted, me being hired there, but they also knew that when you put my name into the Google, nothing really comes up, just some other Michael Cavens and me. So now that I've come out, and let me tell you, I've gone through a lot of shame, and I've had to refer back to the male survivor literature. I've reconnected with my old therapist, just through emails, and just revisiting, because going public in this way, and having pictures out there of me and Frank, in our times, he was a big Republican donor. We went to the White House multiple times. I have pictures. Yeah. It's on my website. I mean,
so there's lots of aspects.
It's a remarkable.
Story. It's
a remarkable.
Yeah.
Right. It's a remarkable story. But in any way, so that's what we do. We get our story out there. And for me, I knew that I needed some national coverage. And writing an op-ed is a way to do that. It's a way to get national coverage. It's a way to reach many, many eyeballs. Yeah. But you got to have something important to say. And I've got the op-ed, and the title of the op-ed is hold on. I'm getting a little fried here. I know you've got it in front of you. The imperfect victimhood.
Right thing. There we go.
The imperfect victimhood.
Yeah, there we go.
Victimhood of male sex abuse survivors. Yes. And then I've also got a couple of guest essays that I'm trying to pitch as well for the gay restaurant and also for my adventures in the gay bar empire. So I've got three things, but the op-ed's the most important. And I've been pitching these last few months. And it's discouraging. You send the ship out and you hope something comes back. Yeah. And it occurred to me, oh my gosh, I found another profession of rejection. My first profession of rejection was theater, and now as a budding writer, I'm getting to experience all that rejection again. But it's okay,
it's creative
because look,
that people don't want to. It's hard to just do, right? Yeah.
Right. And it's, my story is not going to be everyone's cup of tea. And these, newspapers that I've been sending my op-ed to, they said, we received many excellent submissions, and I know that they do. But I know that if I kept at it, I'd eventually get a taker. And a few days ago, I'm thinking, where will my story resonate the most? Where would it be most impactful? And I thought, New Hampshire. So pitch the biggest New Hampshire newspaper who covered my teacher's trial, pitch them. And within 12 hours, they responded. And now, 12 hours later, it's greenlit for this Sunday. Mm-hmm. So it is a big deal because it just, gives me the opportunity to be exposed to many more people. Yes. And get my story out there. And it is part of this process. So it is exciting. And I do talk about the inequality that, in our society, there is this knee-jerk reaction to men and boys and teen boys who are sexually abused, that somehow they should not have allowed it to happen. Somehow they were complicit. Somehow they must have enjoyed it. Somehow. And there is this knee-jerk reaction, and the Me Too movement has really raised awareness to what women have endured for eons and eons. Yes, but still, it's not the same. And people do view male victimhood differently. So that's the point that I'm making in the op-ed.
The same, yeah. Yes. I mean, it's really an extension of the same misogyny that causes the barriers for women coming forward, because it's the same thing that says, oh, we don't want to listen to women, is the same thing that says, take care of it yourself, you're a guy, right? You look at that and it's really the same victimizing mentality, right? That blocks all victims in that way, but in particular, fostering. And I've had this issue on the show as I've reached out to many people. I have people who come on that talk about men's needs, and you have to be careful, right? Because it bleeds into, then you have somebody who's like, yeah, men's needs and men's rights. And it's like, oh, no. Okay, pull back over here to actually, and this is where I think being a champion of male survivors in a way that is healthy and has that healthy masculinity that you're bringing to it. This is where that story is very important. And I'm honored to be part of hopefully promoting the story that you're putting out there, right? Because we need that healthy masculine example of a good man who is a survivor that can stand up with strength as you are and say, we can do this, we can survive. And that's something that
That's right.
I know you're bringing to people.
That's right.
Yeah. Very, very grateful.
And feelings are okay. Thank you. And feelings are okay.
Yeah.
I'm an old Philadelphia kid, and look, Taylor Swift, her boyfriend, yes, Kelsey, he cries openly in front of the world. And you look at that and you go, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And thank you for expressing your feelings.
Yeah, Philly sports fans, famously in touch with their emotions. Famously
the worst fans in the world. And we are proud of that. We are proud to be the worst fans in the world.
I grew up in Harrisburg, and I remember going to Veterans Memorial Stadium to see the Phillies a few times and things, and that was always a part of it. It was not just watching the game. It was also watching the interactions that were there. Anyway.
Yeah.
Well, let's say, where can people go? Where do they follow your work? And in what ways, where do we go to click I'm a follower and help to build up, to get your book released as well?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Because really right now, as I'm making my case to literary agents, this whole thing is making your case. You have to prove yourself. You have to show how viable you are. You have to have a following. So, that's what this is all about. So if your listeners, if you would go to my Michael Caven public Facebook page and follow me, that would be great. And on my public Facebook page, I'm doing excerpts and photos, as well as dispatches from here in Vietnam. It's a fun page, and I do get some really great feedback from some of my marketing in Dallas, and especially Dallas folk. They're really looking forward to me spilling the tea and learning about the intrigue and drama of the gay bar empire world, and all of that. So that's what you can do for me, listener, is just follow me on Facebook. I also have a website, michaelcaven.com, which has more pictures and more stories and lots of information and media stuff and all of that. And again, Dwight, you do amazing work, my brother. Thank you for putting it out there and giving folks platforms to tell their stories. And thank you for your compassion. You're a compassionate therapist. You want to help people to heal. You are helping people to heal. And in the process of helping others, we help ourselves, right?
Absolutely. Thank you. I've appreciated the hand that people give me and have given me along the way too. And also, I consider this to be part of my own healing and my own journey, is getting to know in general the interviews with people, but in specific, it's been a very healing couple of conversations with you as well for me with things. So thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Court Arts Podcast Network. To listen to more Court Arts shows, visit courtamparts.com.